Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Planning Advisory Committee for the town of Quispamsis for Tuesday, January 24th. Item number 2, approval of the agenda. Is there any amendments? None being, can I have a motion to approve, please? Mr. Guest?
So moved.
Have a second on that? Brenda?
So moved.
Can we vote, please?
There it goes. Kendall, yay? He's online.
Kendall, you in for the vote?
I am. It didn't pop up, but I vote yes.
Right.
Thank you. Motion carried unanimously. With that being, we'll move on to item 3, disclosures of interest. None being, we'll move on to item 4, approval of previous minutes. Is there any amendments to the minutes? None being, can I have a motion to approve, please?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Can I have a second on that, Brenda?
I'll second that.
Thank you. Can we have a vote on that, please?
Mr. Chair, I vote yes again. It's
Thank
Kendall.
you. Motion carried unanimously. Move on to item 5, the business arising from previous minutes. Can I have a motion to receive and file, please? Mr. Bishop.
So moved.
Can I have a seconder on that? Mr. Guest?
I'll second that.
Thank you. You have a vote on that, please?
Mr. Chair, that's Kendall again, yes.
Thank you. Motion carried unanimously. Move on to item 6, unfinished business. None being, we'll move on to item 7, new business. Item 7A, 157 Palmer Brook Road. That item has been postponed as the applicant's going to meet with the planning department for further review. With that being said, we'll move on to item 7B, the Wright subdivision. Could the applicant please come up to the podium? And Jennifer, you want to introduce that item for us, please? Oops.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The applicant is requesting one residential building lot to be located at Misty Cove Lane. It's a private lane, though, where the lot would be going. So staff did look at it in review with the subdivision bylaw and other bylaws pertinent with the town, and we do have some recommendations if PAC chooses to support the development officer with this application. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Jennifer, could you please state your name for the record, please?
Brian Wright, 83 Means Cove Road.
Brian, you would have received the same application we did in the mail. Is there anything you'd like to add or discuss prior to questions from PAC members or members of the public?
Well, I know like 2 of the neighbors had concern about like garbage removal, which is garbage that goes out to the end of the laneway regardless where it goes. But talking to the garbage removal about it, they're willing to pick it up at the end of the laneway without a problem. The lot that I'm trying to get approved is closest to Misty Cove Lane, therefore there shouldn't be a problem entering or exiting the property. I don't know, they have water concern issues, which clearly you can see that their homes are more elevated than what the property is that I'm selling. So there's really no risk of water issues in that fashion. And one of the residents had mentioned about culvert being in place at there. There is a culvert actually at the end of Misty Cove Lane when it enters the gravel portion of the road. So that's all I kind of seen with concerns. I I know, like I say, they were worried about the garbage. Garbage goes out once a week. It usually goes out in the morning when people go to work and picked up when they come home. As of right now, I know there's 2 people that put their garbage out there. That one is technically supposed to be going up to the top of Means Cove Road, which if it's a problem, it can be addressed, and he can also put his garbage at the top of the Means Cove Road also. But as for garbage removal, they didn't have a problem picking it up, either on Means Cove Road or at the bottom of Misty Cove Lane.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for the applicant from members of PAC? Mr. Bishop?
I guess I'll have one through to either Jennifer or Dwight. In our package, I guess we received this time, it wasn't, I don't think it was in the last package. Back in October 7th, 2005, there was a memorandum there that Gary Logier put in, and I guess it was recommendations to PAC when the lot was first proposed. And in there, again, this is 2005, Mr. Logier stated in there that it's not unreasonable for the town to consider the application, but the area does have future development potential, and the single lot placement will have to be taken into account when laying out future street lots. It should also be recognized that the proposed layout of the common right-of-way could be extended and widened in the future should the opportunity arise to upgrade the area to a municipal street. In addition, the future development of a private lane into a full-fledged street will also require additional input from PAC. So, I mean, it's been stated, I guess, in the past that this is coming forward at some point in time. Also, further down in that memorandum, it says any future dwelling construction will be subject to the normal building permit process and setback regulations, and where this lot has river frontage. I mean, there's a few more details that go in there, but it talks at length about that street. And I guess the final point of it is that he states, alternatively, at what point can we expect people purchasing these homes to demand equal service for the taxes that they pay? So again, I certainly, as everybody knows, I'm pro-development. I am not pro-private street. There are times when the private street works for development, when developers are putting development forward. So again, there is a time and a place for it. But also even a statement in information in the staff report about this. We go back into when Mr. Wilson purchased the land from Riverfront Properties, and in that information, it was actually in the purchase sale agreement with Mr. Wilson, Jamie Scott Robinson, and Samantha Trudy Robinson, so the people that owned the house at that point in on the private lane that purchased the access. In basically the Schedule A of those terms and conditions, Riverfront Properties had to build a public street to the edge of the property and pave it. So they had basically had to build 67.3 meters of street to service the lot basically that was bordering on the right property, and then grant the access or sold the access to Mr. Wilson and the Robinsons at that point in time. So here we have a developer having to build a public street just for one lot. And again, Mr. Wright's in the same predicament, is that he's looking to develop land. We know that there's more possibilities of land to be developed in that area, and just basically putting a small little right-of-way in there, and I guess it was Mr. Wilson that put the right-of-way in there, and the right-of-way is basically a driveway. I guess there's a statement in there that Mr. Wilson put in that they just put an access through And then in the future, we're going to do something to actually bring it up to private road standard, which there really isn't a private road standard that's written down anywheres. But we just can't accept private lanes in areas where they go into large pieces of property with future development, and then just keep saying, "Oh, we'll deal with that later. We'll deal with that later. We'll deal with that later." So that's my point.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Dwight?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through you to Mr. Bishop. So the staff report that Mr. Bishop is referring to from Mr. Lozier, who was the development officer at the time, was in reference to an application that came before the Planning Advisory Committee regarding what is now PID 302497726, which was identified on the plan at the time as being lot, I think, 07-1, which was a land that was owned by Mrs. Saunders, and then Mr. Wilson approached Mrs. Saunders to acquire that property. The proposed original access to that property was from the Means Cove Road. So it would have been utilizing the existing right-of-way from the Means Cove Road that was servicing 2 additional lots. And then the request was to grant access to the proposed lot 01-7. At that time, the development officer, Mr. Lozier, made recommendations in his report to PAC to consider, again, paraphrasing and summarizing, that at some point you have to take consideration how many lots you want on private land, and then given its location, its proximity to Misty Cove, it may be reasonable to look at establishing at that point in time right-of-ways to the lot off Misty Cove Lane. Also in that report, it indicated that any dwelling location on that lot should be at least 27.5 meters from what I would call, looking north, page up north, from the eastern boundary of the property line. That was to accommodate a potential future right-of-way, which could have been public or private at the time, of 20 meters, plus a 7.5 meter setback then from that particular edge. That was the reason for the 27.5 meters, which would have put any dwelling on this lot of 0.71 outside of a potential right-of-way for a street or a road, as well as meeting the setback under the zoning bylaw. The notice of decision, I believe, that was generated from that particular item was that the tentative plan was to review and look at the potential to generate a right-of-way that would sort of be in line with where a potential street may go, and provide access off of Misty Cove Lane versus coming off Means Cove Road. Which leads us kind of to where we are today, because that revised tentative plan did come back to the PAC at the time, and what was approved was a right-of-way. So the original tentative plan that had lot 07-1 with access off Means Cove Road was modified, where 27.5 meters was provided for a right-of-way. That 27.5 meters was retained by Mrs. Saunders, and it was granted as a right-of-way versus a future street. Back at the time of approving lot 07-1 and the approval to provide a right-of-way, it would have been reasonable at that time for Planning Advisory Committee to look at 2 options: granting a right-of-way over Mrs. Saunders' property in favor of Mr. Wilson, and if at the time an existing property owner, but we're looking at specifically right now the right-of-way. So they could have looked at it from 2 perspectives. One, it's simply a right-of-way over the property, and Mrs. Saunders retains ownership of the property, but there is a right-of-way access in favor of 07-1 from Misty Cove. Or the other option would have been, at that point in time, declare it as a future street, put it on the subdivision as a future street with ownership being vested in the municipality. Unfortunately, as we look at it today and we're reviewing the subdivision plan, the option that was approved by the Planning Advisory Committee at the time was a right-of-way. And that's what we have today. Part of that understanding, I think, purchase and sale agreement was at the time of lot 07-1, Misty Cove Lane ended in terms of the actual street to a municipal standard just in front of lot, what is now civic number 503. So there's a solid line that goes across there. And I believe the purchase and sale agreement, which was maybe worked out, again, Mr. Wilson is not attending, and I'm just looking at the information that I have, summarizing it. There was an agreement with Riverfront Properties to at least extend or grant access over what was Riverfront Properties at the time, and to build some sort of access to a standard. That was my understanding, and based on the information that I have and my recollection, that did not happen until 2012 in order to develop 503. At that time, a consultant firm was engaged to design and develop the property and to a municipal standard, to a street standard, and that's when that was constructed. So in terms of the item of a purchase and sale agreement and what was worked out in terms of expense and those such things, that portion is now a public street. So it's town ownership, it's met standards, it's for whoever wants to access it, it's done. By granting a right-of-way instead of a future street, again, Mrs. Saunders at the time and now Mr. Wright has ownership, still retains ownership of that land. Correct. So it's a right-of-way. So in terms of the development of that portion from Misty Cove to the abutting property lines of Mr. Wilson and Mr. Wright, that was also factored across the development of lot 503. It's a subdividing and creating of lot 503 of Misty Cove.
Where's lot 503 up there?
It's what's written as Riverfront Properties. Yeah, so it would have been created off of that remnant portion of
Oh, right there.
right there.
497's that little strip there.
Right. So while that might have been a portion of the purchase and sale, and there might have been some initial work that was done in terms of developing, an access or a driveway as part of the purchase and sale agreement with Mr. Wilson, the actual development to a municipal standard didn't happen in 2012 or 2013 when that Riverfront property remnant parcel was subdivided and then became what is now 503 Misty Cove Lane, as well as the parcel X or the 497, which is the joint access to the river to the benefit of the property, some of the property owners of that particular development. So that's where we stand. So in terms of the application that's now before Planning Advisory Committee from Mr. Wright is basically because the lot doesn't front a municipal street, it's providing what is reasonable access to this application. There is a right-of-way that is currently established in favor of Mr. Wilson, and I believe it extends to, Mr. Wright can correct me, to one additional property owner on that currently exists. Yeah, I believe it's 479, who originally had an access to the Means Cove Road, but I think they relinquished that access in favor of getting access over Misty Cove. So given the location, as is included in my staff report, given the location where it sits, pretty close to Misty Cove Lane, is it reasonable that a simple driveway that could come off the end of Misty Cove Lane and access this lot? That's why it's before Planning Advisory Committee to consider what is reasonable access. And as I've indicated, it was Mr. Wilson's subdivision was reviewed by the Planning Advisory Committee back in 2007. It was then approved as a right-of-way versus a future street. And so, there's been correspondence that's been submitted indicating the desire to have it as a public street. But as I've indicated in my staff report, along with Ms. Jarvis, you have two abutting property owners. So in order for a public street to be created, it has to go across Mr. Wright's property, who then ultimately would have to sign off as a landowner to create a public street to best in the municipality. And then you have Mr. Wright, who's before Planning Advisory Committee, saying, I want to generate this one lot, potentially service it with an additional driveway off of the end of Misty Cove Lane. So this is why I've indicated in my staff report, there seems to be this impasse between two property owners, and I made reference to the subdivision bylaw, which says, from a development perspective, if there seems to be a potential for prejudicing future development, but in this particular case, is it prejudicing both property owners when you have somebody saying it should be a public street, but you need the adjoining property owner to sign off on it, and then you have that property owner before Planning Advisory Committee asking to create one additional lot to be serviced by a driveway off of, across his land from the Misty Cove, but, is being challenged in terms of whether that's reasonable. So long-winded response to sort of the history of where we are, but that's ultimately where we are right now. Is in order to create this lot, does in front of Municipal Street, there has to be an approval by the Planning Advisory Committee in terms of the proposed access, which again, at this stage would be a right-of-way over Mr. Wright's property to access this particular single lot. And that's the request.
So Dwight, that, in the plan in the file, that existing 20-meter right-of-way is on Mr. Wright's property, not Mr. Wilson's. Is that correct? Okay. So does Mr. Wilson have access over that right-of-way now in his deed? Yeah, okay.
The plan that's shown on the screen is the registered subdivision plan that created that right-of-way.
Okay.
That is 20 meters wide, which is reflective of the recommendations for consideration from Mr. Logier back in 2007, when it was from a planning perspective, looking at long-term future planning, ensuring that there was potential for the road extension, and then making sure that any residential lot was on Mr. Wilson's property was set back from that right of way. Again, the item that I'm not aware of, based on my looking through background information, is I'm not sure what the original application that came before the Planning Advisory Committee was from Mr. Wilson requesting or, looking to acquire a portion of this land from Mrs. Saunders. Was it simply the development of his home, a single home on this, I don't know how many acres it is, or was it with the intent of full-fledged future development? At this stage, I can't answer that question, because I can't find that in the records, which ultimately would have, an impact on the access. And I think, Mr. Logier, looking at it from a long-range planning perspective, foresight, saying, okay, we need to make sure that, any development of that lot, the residential homes are off of where the alignment of the right-of-way could be extended, which brings us to where we are with that right-of-way over Mr. Wright's property. It's a reflection of the decision of PAC.
So if Dwight, if Mr. Wilson wishes to build a house on his property today without it being subdivided, he can do that because he has private access to the Mr. Wright's private right-of-way? Or that's still got to come back to PAC for approval because he's not abutting a public street?
Through you, Mr. Chair, so if there's an application from Mr. Wilson with respect to building a home on this property, it would be through the the existing zoning bylaw, development permit, building permit process. The lot is already created. There's deeded right-of-way access to that particular lot. So a single building permit would not require a review of the planning advisory committee unless you're getting into other elements of the zoning bylaw with respect to developing on a waterfront, making sure you have the right elevations, those types of things. But actually submitting a new subdivision plan and getting approval of a lot that does in front of Municipal Street, that would not be required because the right-of-way is there.
Unless he's subdivided.
If you're subdividing, then again,
That's right.
you would be the same item of consideration that is before PAC right now. You're
Yeah.
creating lots that do not front
Yep.
municipal
Okay.
streets.
Thank you. Mr. Bishop?
Yeah, I guess through, Mr. Chair, to Dwight. So if Mr. Wilson was to develop his property, he would have to bring the street up to municipal standards to a public road, would he not?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that would be a decision of the Planning Advisory Committee because the subdivision bylaw says that unless you create lots that front a street owned by the municipality or by the Crown, then any alternate access would need to be approved by the Planning Advisory Committee, which means you're coming back to the Planning Advisory Committee looking at, I'm not going to create a public street, but I'm going to look at other access. And then PAC would have that decision. It would then go back to how are you accessing your property? Again, you would be availing of the right-of-way that currently exists. The question that then would have to be answered is, does that right-of-way extend to any other lots that would be created off of that subdivision? Again, that's an answer. That would be a question that would have to be explored, and the information would be provided to the Planning Advisory Committee at that time. But then it gets back to other issues. Again, it goes back to how many lots servicing waste service, making sure it meets minimum standards with respect to being accessed by emergency service providers, naming, civic numbering, all those types of things.
Thank you, Dwight. So I'm still a little confused. So if Mr. Wilson wants to build the lot, you're saying that he has to potentially upgrade that right-of-way, which he doesn't own, or that's on someone else's property, so that he can access his own lot?
If there's an application that comes in for the development of that particular property,
Yes.
and it's a single building on the lot as it currently exists, it would be reviewed through the development permit and building permit process. So he would have to ensure he had septic approval, it can be serviced, those types of things. The lot is created, the right-of-way to access the lot is created. So it would be the same as a long driveway to a single house on his lot.
Perfect. It would be just any further development on Mr. Wright's or subdividing.
It would,
Mr. Wilson.
yeah, so it would be any future subdividing of Mr. Wilson's property or any subdividing of Mr. Wright's property, if PAC wishes to consider that through this process.
Thank you, Dwight. Appreciate that. Any members of PAC have any further questions for the applicant or staff? Brent?
Two questions. First, the applicant, the property that you're subdividing, is that already sold?
I do have a potential buyer for it, yes, I do.
Okay, because I know it's Martha Lister, or one of the listers has a sign that says it's
Yeah.
sold. So is the property sold or not sold?
Well, pending
Pending, okay.
pending approval.
Okay. So my other question for Mr. Chairman is for Dwight. Dwight, is there criteria in the bylaw, et cetera, saying, okay, on a right of way or a private lane, once you have X amount of houses, it has to be built to a standard?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Preston, our subdivision bylaw currently does not get into the specifics of how many homes that exist on a right-of-way that flags or triggers it to be brought to municipal standard. As I've mentioned multiple times, on many occasions in the past, that is coming, and hopefully coming sooner than longer. So what we've sort of stepped back is obviously all these come to the Planning Advisory Committee. planning, we look at what has the PAC approved in the past. And we also have to look at when it becomes in terms of how many, in terms of civic numbering and emergency access, at what point, does it need to become a private lane? And we default to guidelines and things that we have that basically says once you hit 3 lots, then it needs to become a private name lane, so it can be civic numbered accordingly. Okay. These particular, I think, these particular lots, this particular lot, we may be able to extend the civic numbering off of Misty Cove, but that's, again, it's going to be based on PAC's decision with respect.
Thank you, Dwight. Brenda?
Just a question, either one of you can answer it. I know the right-of-way becomes narrower as you go onto the property. It's 10 meters?
It's 5 meters is what
5
it is.
meters?
Yeah, so
Okay. But
15 feet,
okay, so that's the right-of-way at a certain point.
yes.
Does it go in still clear up to where you plow or the street ends, or part of that is still wider by the Wilson's
It's all
property?
roughly about 15 feet, maybe a little bit better in spots, but like minimum 15 feet.
So if that was to be developed to town standards, that, is anybody offering you some property to include to that right away? So, it's not all on your property?
No, I've discussed it with Mr. Wilson probably for the last 8 years about what he wanted to do, and we've never come to an agreement with it. Still, he has my number, I have his number. We've never actually sat down and come to an agreement. So as for Mr. Wilson, originally his plan was to build a home on his property when he purchased it from my grandmother, and he still hasn't. So unfortunately,
Yeah.
I can't speak for Mr. Wilson on what he plans on doing, but as of right now, we haven't came to an agreement.
If Mr. Wilson approached you and said, would you sign off of the property if I build that whole street, all the money, would you think about that?
I would definitely consider talking to him, but at this point, like I say, we've never come to an actual agreement to it. Like, I've sat down at Tim Hortons and had a coffee with him and discussed the matter, and here we are, right?
To me, yes, you're looking at cost sharing, but there's also land that has to be
Yeah.
brought into part of that. If that's all on your property, that's really not fair to you as a developer to give up that right away the whole way,
Exactly.
So this is my opinion. I try to, vote on things if I feel it would be in something I can live with. So I say if I can or can't. I really don't have any problem with that one development on the corner, but that's just me, and I'm not the voice of PAC for sure. But yeah, when I look at that, I think, okay, there's something going on there that we're not really aware of, and hard to get an
Yeah.
agreement going. So, anyway, I would not try to restrict your potential for that one lot development. It could be hardship on your part and something like that. So anyway, I will support what the PAC, I would support the recommendation to go forward with that.
Thanks, Brenda. I just have one question for Mr. Bishop. So, Mr. Wilson, did they purchase the property from you or the son?
Mr. Wilson?
Yes,
He had purchased it from my grandmother.
yes. So when that was purchased, there was no the right of way was always on,
On our property.
yeah, okay,
Yes.
gotcha. So he had no way, he couldn't purchase that right away anyway.
No.
Okay, all right, thank you. Mr. Bishop?
Yeah, so, the back end, I guess when Mr. Logier had, this was 2005, I guess it must have been 2007 when this whole parcel was subdivided. Mr. Wright, what year did you build your home?
It would have been 2015, I believe,
So that was well after, I guess Mr. Logier
possibly
said
2015.
no, any further construction. the road would have to be brought up to municipal standards. So that was after that as well too.
And at that time, there was only access up to the Means Cove roadway, which there wasn't access down at the bottom portion.
So should that not have been brought up to municipal standards? I guess my question to Mr. Colburn?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Bishop, that's why these items come before the Planning Advisory Committee, and the Planning Advisory reviews the access because they don't front a municipal street or a road owned by the Crown. Therefore, as part of the conditions of approval, which the development officer requires in order to approve a subdivision plan, those are terms and conditions that the Planning Advisory Committee has the authority to present as part of the approval process. And I believe that as well, Mr. Wright would have owned the land at that time. Again, Mr. Wright can respond to that. And his access would have been from the Means Cove Road, or either or. So he would have been the property owner at that time.
I believe I did own it back then too.
Again, but key focus is to look at the application that's before Planning Advisory Committee, look at the requirements from the subdivision bylaw, which is to approve an access that isn't a public street, and to look at it in terms of the overall impacts. Can they be mitigated? Are they reasonable? And again, if we go back to what seems to be the question is, if there's a development on lot 07-1 today as a house, it would be a long driveway over right of way. The application that's before the Planning Advisory Committee right now is essentially asking the same.
Thank you, Dwight. Any further questions? Brenda?
Just a quick one. Mr. Wright, your address is something Means Cove Road?
It's 83 Means Cove Road.
Okay, so your development or house basically fronts on Means Cove Road, not Misty Lake Road or
Correct.
Misty Cove Road. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so you have not built a house on Misty Cove.
I have not, no.
Okay, thank you.
With Misty Cove Lane, like with the homes that are there now, technically only Glenn travels out that way. Duncan does himself, but Duncan is permitted to come up to the top of the Means Cove Road to come out, which would leave Kenny Wilson, which home isn't built there yet. Glenn, which has access to Misty Cove Lane, and potentially that future lot would have access to it too. Myself, I usually travel up always to the top of the Means Cove Road, which Glenn does himself. He brings his daughter up to the top of the hill every day. His daughter walks down the hill every day. So a lot more of the access is from the Means Cove Road.
Any further questions from members of PAC to the applicant or to town staff?
Mr. Chairman, Mark here.
Yes, Mark?
I think my question is for Dwight. Assuming that down the road, Mr. Wilson wants to subdivide his property, or Mr. Wright wants to subdivide his property and add more single pad, who would be responsible to pay for the upgrade to municipal standard for the right-of-way today, or would it be a cost sharing between all the property owners?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Gosland, the town would not sort of get in terms of looking at who pays for what, and any private arrangements between property owners is not something that the town would be getting involved in. We would simply make sure that a subdivision plan came in, it met the requirements of the Community Planning Act and our subdivision bylaw, and both property owners were signing off on the subdivision plan. If there was land that involved more than one property owner, in this particular case, based on the subdivision plan as it sits today and the location of the right-of-way, and given that it is 20 meters wide, it would be reasonable to believe that that's where the street would sit. That in this particular case, the property owner that would be signing off would be Mr. Wright, unless there is prior to that, some sort of land transaction where that gets transferred to the adjoining property owners, and then all that, they would have to sign off accordingly. So essentially, we look at it from the subdivision plan, what it's proposing. If it's proposing a right-of-way or a street to be vested in the municipality, then we look at it to make sure it's compliance with the Community Planning Act, subdivision bylaw, and the appropriate property owners have signed off. Once that plan gets registered, then in accordance with the Community Planning Act, it's free and clear title. So any encumbrances that may be on it are basically removed, and it's free title to the municipality in terms of ownership of the right-of-way. So we wouldn't get into sort of forcing people to pay certain percentages. Would it be reasonable for two property owners to sit and sort of come to that arrangement? Again, we don't get into negotiations and overseeing such things. It's basically, the plans come in, we review them, and we bring them forward for approval.
Thank you. My second question is, again, maybe you mentioned it earlier during the conversation and I may have missed that, but how many more lots can be added on to this right away? Or just one more lot, or Mr. Wilson may decide to subdivide it, 1, 2, or 3, or 4 parcel, whatever, or Mr. Wright may decide to. So how many more lot, my question is, can be added on before it becomes a municipal street?
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, because at this point in time, we do not have in our subdivision bylaw actual trigger points. So there isn't that says that once X number of lots are on a private lane or on a right-of-way, then it must come to municipal standard. We bring from planning requirement, an approval requirement, we have to bring all that to the Planning Advisory Committee, who takes into consideration the total number of lots that are being proposed, the access that is being proposed, to what standard is that being proposed to be maintained? Is there an agreement in place to ensure that it's being maintained? Is the onus put on one particular property owner? So there are a number of factors that have to be considered when we come into how many lots are on a private lane. Again, there's nothing in our subdivision bylaw that's a trigger point. Again, as I've mentioned, we're hoping to have that sooner than later. And then that's what we would default to if it existed. It would be sort of clear, black and white. So it goes back to Planning Advisory Committee reviewing and looking at it on a case-by-case basis. And then, as I mentioned before, when you get into, we refer to guidelines in terms of when things should be named for the purpose of civic numbering, just to make it clear. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dwight. Yeah, so we can set conditions in PAC for any future development that it has to be brought up to standard. Mr. Bishop.
Yeah, I guess, Mr. Wright, when was the last time you talked to Mr. Wilson about cost sharing the road? Because Mr. Wilson has stated in his letters to PAC that he is willing to share the cost. So you say that you haven't spoken to him, or?
I have spoken.
When was the last time you spoke to him about this matter?
Probably about 2.
So before last PAC, or?
Agreements never. I'm trying to develop. Well, the cost difference, I would have.
Sorry, but I cannot hear what Mr. Wright is saying.
Add up to it, right?
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. But yeah, I have spoken to Kenny Wilson about it, but an agreement's never been made. Like I say, what he wants to sell and what I want to sell is 2 totally different things.
I mean,
Like when it
the
comes
amount
to
that
cost.
to share.
Yeah,
He-
like when it comes to cost, like why it's going on my property for one. You know, I'm selling a lot that's worth $90,000. He has the potential of selling lots that are worth upwards to $1 million. When it comes to cost, why would I want to do that? Like, there has to be, you know, like I'm not benefiting from any of this by me contributing to that. Like at this time, I planned on selling 2 lots is what I originally planned on doing, and hanging on to the rest basically for retirement is more or less what my plans were. At this point, like I say, if my lot doesn't get approved, then that's what I'll do. I'll just hang on to it. I enjoy the privacy. A lot of people enjoy the private lane. There's people that walk it all the time. There's people walking it today. Glenn himself, he enjoys it. Like, when it comes to cost wise, like I say, we've never sat down and come to a number what we thought would be fair at the end of the day.
I guess the other point is, and I can't remember if it was Alita Beers made it, or Dr. Ahmad made it. I was just kind of looking through my notes here, but as more lots get developed and more people, have there, so whether you had 2 lots and Mr. Wilson changes his into 2 lots, the more, as Dwight just mentioned, the more people you have to try to make a decision, the tougher it gets. So I guess that's kind of my point is now, for future development, it should be brought up to a public street so that in the future, people's garbage is taken care of, the road is taken care of by the town, and we don't run into these problems in the future, which right now as a private street, again, I understand that Mr. Wilson put that road through there, but, I guess Brenda made a comment, how narrow it is. It is narrow in certain spots. It was never, to my knowledge, that right-of-way that was put through there was never brought up to, a public street or a private lane standard or any standard. There's no drainage. It doesn't take care of any of the drainage of any of the water. The culvert that's there that was just kind of put in there is an old, rusty old galvanized culvert. So there was no engineered drawings, there's no engineered plans. It was just basically paid for the right-of-way to go cut through to Misty Cove. They hired a contractor to basically just kind of cut the trees down and put some soil down and toss the culvert in, but it does not address any of the water problems that run down the other side of the street, onto the Beers' property. So I mean, there's just so many things that haven't been addressed and taken care of. Again, you were here, or whatever it was, 2018, and it all got approved, and these lots could have been in and they could have been sold and done, but the road would have also been upgraded at that point in time because that was what was in the agreement.
Which I agreed that would have been fine. I would have been willing to do that. I still would be willing to do that if my 2 lots were approved up to this day.
Yeah. So, but again, then we get into future development of more lots go in there, more lots go in there, more people go in there. So again, why should we be making developers pay to put in public, or private, public streets, bring them up to grade, pave them and do everything to access, small pieces of land? They have, large sums of money that they have to put in order to make developments. Otherwise, we're going to have a bunch of small private lanes kind of just ducking in and out all over the place throughout the valley. That's kind of my point.
I get that, but when Mr. Wilson purchased his property, if he planned on developing it, why didn't he take care of it then?
Thank you. Any further questions from members of PAC to the applicant? Mr. Bishop.
I guess to that point, Mr. Wilson only purchased that right away because, to my knowledge, the Riverfront Properties wouldn't sell the right of way to Mr. Wilson. So that was the reason why he never did anything up until he purchased the right of way, is because it was at that point that Riverfront Properties said that they would sell the right of way to him. So that's why he didn't do anything. And to my, from what I'm gathering, that would be the reason.
Well, I know if I purchased that much property and I planned on dividing it, I think I would have a plan in order to make sure that it was possible for me to do so.
Dwight?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I guess just point of order, that particular portion of property is really, in terms of this particular application, is a moot point because it is town property, or it is a public street, it's to public standards. And so it's to the benefit of the entire public, and access now to those properties do come off of a public street, an extension of Misty Cove, up to 497.
Thank you, Dwight. Any further questions from members of PAC to the applicant? None being, is there anyone online or in the audience willing to speak for or against this item? Could you please come up and state your name at the podium? Could you please sit down, Mr. Wright?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, can you come up and speak to the mic? Yep.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm Afzal Ahmad. I'm one of the residents on the last house on the Rockefeller Drive. And
Number 90,
number 101.
101, okay.
Yeah. I've been aware of these proceedings for some time, and I read with a lot of interest the last decision, which was denial of development of the plots. And my question is that initially Mr. Wright was proposing 2 plots, and now he's put an application for 1. In my view, nothing has changed. Unless I'm mistaken here, I would like to know what has changed that he's now coming up with this plan of 1 development instead of 2. I am all for development. I have nothing against Mr. Wright. I would like to see more houses built there. But if we are setting a precedent of compromising the standards with 1 plot, few years later somebody else will come with the same idea. And as Mr. Bishop pointed out, and the more people get involved in this, the more difficult it will become to develop a proper public road. These are my concerns. Some of them I have put in my email.
Thank you. Appreciate that. We'll wait till Dwight comes back, and I think before you came, the applicant, Ms. Jarvis, had read through the staff report and identified all the background and discussion with the lot, and talked about, was there a talk about, Jennifer, the difference between this application and the previous one?
There was not, Mr. Chair, I did not go into any detail with that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, could the applicant please come up? Oh, what?
Maybe others?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask. Is there any others in the audience or online willing to speak for or against this item?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead. Who's this?
Ken Wilson?
Ken, okay, go ahead, Ken.
Yes, maybe I should just clarify a few of the points. When we originally purchased the property from Brian's grandmother, at that time, the only access was off Minas Cove Road, which is about 1 kilometer down to the property. And our intention at that time was for a single family, with the idea that we could subdivide it for, and maybe make 2 more lots with us, maybe for family members. Anyway, at that point in time, it became very apparent when we purchased the property that what was included is this 20-meter right-of-way that we're talking about right now. That's the area of land that's between our property and Mr. Wright's. That was actually in our purchase and sale agreement with his grandmother. When we went to planning and talked to Gary Logier, his recommendation was that this had to be left with the larger landowner because it was going to be a future street. There was no talk of it, that it possibly could be designated at that time as a future street. We never heard that conversation. But what our understanding was that this was going to be a public street. So we gave up that right. We gave up that. We moved our property line back, had the property approved, And what happened next was that we do have a right of way over the entire 66 feet wide by whatever the length it is. The next thing we want to do is be able to access Misty Cove. And, because we wanted a public street in there. We wanted to get, that was the intention of it, because it was very close. Mr. Robinson, Bruce Robinson, owned the property through Riverfront. And there was a right of way for the people that own on Rockefeller and Misty Cove, or probably in Rockefeller, to the water. And what we want to do is access that area out through there. We talked for 5 years to them. And finally, we had an agreement, 2012. There was never ever mentioned at any time during this about private lanes or private roads being in front of us, ever. Anyway, we made a deal with Mr. Robinson and Jamie Robinson, his wife, and we went ahead, and the part of that agreement was to access for public street. So then, when that would give the opportunity then for that area that's in front of our property, the one we're talking about right now, to become a public street. But in the meantime, all we did, we put a little driveway in there just to have access to our property. That was faster and more efficient and whatnot, and to Mr. Jamie Robinson's property. And so this is where this evolved. So we have a right of way over that entire section. So when we talk about ownership of land in this, that we actually own that, we actually paid for it, and we didn't get a credit back on it. We just moved our property line back, and that's how that all evolved. In 2012, the property, that section of property was given to Brian from his grandmother, which is fine. And so at the same time, we weren't aware of any problems. We went ahead and put in that little driveway, and we made it 13 feet wide. That was the idea behind it. Kevin Saunders put it in for us, and it was not up to any standard because we were looking at later on. We know it's Mr. Wright. He at that time, Brian wasn't interested in participating, so we went ahead and put the cost in it and did it. I understand what he's talking about. This is the first time I actually heard that he felt the land was part of the value that he was in consideration, but that's fine. We're still interested in having a public street there. Private lanes just it's a dead end issue. I don't understand why. I understand it from a perspective of development because it saves a lot of money, but for the end user, it isn't very good. And that's where we are with it. We want to develop our property. Our family members that we were thinking at the time are moving on to other things, and so we want to develop our property. We cannot develop it because one of the other part of the agreements that we had with Brian's grandmother was that when we gave up the right to that land, we had conveyance rights. In other words, we could convey that right away to anybody we want. So if we wanted to develop that for ourselves, we could convey that to the town, right? We'd build it up to the standard and convey that. We can't do that now. Why can't we do that? Well, Mrs. Saunders, Brian's grandmother, anyway, her lawyer left that out of the agreement. It's in our purchase and sale agreement, but it's left out of our deed. And our lawyer never picked it up. He's passed away now, and now that is before the Legal Society of New Brunswick. And Mr. Garish is getting in contact with Mr. Wright's lawyer, Mr. Vigneault, trying to rectify that. So that would give us the right then to convey that land to the town. We could go ahead and develop it, put in a road, do what we have to do, and then that's the end of the issue. But the issue is that we don't have the conveyance rights. We have the right over it, but we cannot convey that to the town. We can upgrade it, but it still can't be given to the town. And there's the issue. We paid for the little strip of driveway that went down there. Yes, it's not up to any inch. Never were supposed to be. And we took an old, just a couple of old culverts and shoved them in there because it was all temporary. What we were thinking was that this issue would be resolved by now, but it's not. Anyway, we would like to be able to develop the property with a public street. And the only thing is holding us up is basically the idea that private lane access, because it's cheaper to do. And I'm sure we can come to some sort of an agreement on cost and all that stuff. And even, some other thing that put in a turnaround, whatever we could come up with that suits everybody, but it's a dead end issue for us then. If you approve this is a private street, that is the end of it, because as you know, the next application will be for the extended private street. See, there's already a private street or whatever going up what I call the Henderson one, where Doug Henderson and his family lived there, and it stretched from right down to 89 Means Cove. And that's where we have access all the way down through there. Also, plus we have a right of way over this other piece of land that we gave up. But that's not the answer. The answer to the question here is public street, and we're perfectly willing to sit down and get this thing done. And yeah, we need your support. So we're asking you to turn this application down, let us negotiate this thing out, and maybe then we can, at that point in time, maybe Mr. Wright will sit down with us and say, look, there is value here for both parties, and let's work a deal out and we can do something. But as long as it stands with the private lane issue being there, then I don't think Mr. Wright is going to even entertain the idea. I could be wrong, Brian. I don't know. You're right there, so I understand where you're coming from, because it's a lot less dollars for you and it meets your needs, but it certainly doesn't do anything for us. So is there any questions that anybody has for me?
Not right now, Mr. Wilson. We're good. Thank you. Dwight?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a point of clarification. I know we interchange the terms private lane and right-of-ways, but there are distinct differences. From a planning perspective, a private lane is actually a named lane. So if we look at, for example, Water Edge Lane, that is a private lane. Angel Lane is a private lane. It's named, lots are civic numbered of it. It's not maintained by the town or owned by the town. So it is when we're a planning perspective, that's what we look at. When we say it's going to become a private lane, which means it's going to become named, there's some standard or level of care put forward, and you can civic number off of it. So we have those throughout the town. What we're dealing with here is simply driveways. There's legal access over somebody else's property. That would be applicable to 83, 87, I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. They're just simply driveways, right? They're civic numbered off of Means Cove, right? So when we look at what's, that's what we have here. We don't have named private lanes. It's simply granting right-of-ways over properties, and all of a sudden they become driveways, which means, does the town have standards for what a driveway is supposed to look like? No. We have recommended widths, but it's supposed to be hard surface, those types of things. No. So that's what we have here. So just a point of clarification, right? There's been this application doesn't include a named private lane. It's just simply, the request is, can you approve this lot? We're going to give this person driveway access over my property. It's not a lane. What we recommend is we look at from a planning perspective, and we look at, okay, how far away is that lot from a public street? Is there a challenge to get a service? That's first priority, is emergency services, life safety. Can an emergency vehicle get to that lane, get to that dwelling unobstructed?
Thanks, Dwight. Third and final time, is there anyone online in the audience willing to speak for or against this item?
Well, can I have another, hello?
No, well, you're only allowed to speak once, Mr. Wilson.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
No, I just want to respond to Mr. Colburn, that's all, but anyway, that's okay.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. You can respond back to Mr. Colburn.
Yeah, so basically, if you approve, what he's talking about is driveways, but what happens is it's got a collective effect to it. Well, it's okay last time, and then the next time, and this will, if basically it's laying the foundation for private lanes. And why not just nip it in the bud and go the full route here with a public street, even if it comes in partway and meets, at least part of our needs. That's all we're asking for. Just even part of the way in.
And I guess there's options next time option for another lot to future next lot to be, everything has to be brought up to a city
See,
street
his
at that
next-
time too.
But his next lot is, that's the full length. That lot that he's talking about is the full length of our property. That's that entire area, right? So,
I think so from the last,
yeah,
from our
so there,
last meeting.
there won't be, yeah. So that basically denies us any opportunity for development by allowing that, because we can't convey that land. We
It's my
can't-
understanding, Mr. Wilson, from talking to Mr. Colburn earlier, and I may be wrong, you're allowed to build your house on that lot, as long as you don't subdivide it, to access up to Misty Cove or Means Cove, correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's my understanding also.
Yep. Until
Yeah.
you
No,
subdivide,
what we-
until you
what we
subdivide
wanted
it.
to do- We wanted to subdivide it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
No further questions from PAC members? Would someone from PAC like to put a motion for or against with terms and conditions, please? Mr. Bishop,
I'll put a motion forward that PAC not approve the Wright subdivision Phase 1 and let Mr. Wilson and Mr. Wright meet and see if they can't come to an agreement on cost sharing of public street.
that being said, is there a seconder on the floor for that? Is there a seconder on the floor for that? None being, that motion gets defeated. Can we have, is there another motion put forward by PAC members, please? Mr. Gett,
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to put forward the motion that the Planning Advisory Committee approve the proposed right-of-way access to Lot 18-1 Wright subdivision within the existing 20-meter right-of-way as shown on the plan, subject to the following terms and conditions and any other terms and conditions PAC may impose. Number one, any further subdividing of the remnant parcel PID 30294052 shall require the 20-meter wide right-of-way as shown on the plan to be constructed to a municipal public street standard. Number two, the property owner is to enter into a hold harmless agreement to protect the town and to make the property and homeowners aware of the responsibilities associated with the private driveway and does not front a municipal street and highlights the concerns from fire, police, and ambulance and the importance of unobstructed access. Number three, a hold harmless agreement to incorporate a clause whereby it is recognized that investment made in construction of the private access will not be covered if it is destroyed during construction of a public street to municipal standards, and the owner further agrees to maintain the access to a reasonable standard satisfactory to the town until such time as the private access becomes a public street. Number four, submission of approval from the Department of Public Safety for the installation of an on-site sewage disposal system as per the Public Health Act of New Brunswick, along with a copy of the associated building plans to issuing a development permit by the town. Number five, the property owner is responsible for all costs associated with drilling, installation, testing, and maintenance of the private well system. Number six, land for public purposes obligations to be met through a payment of $750 in lieu of land dedication. Number seven, filing fees totaling $100 for a subdivision plan of 2 lots or less. And finally, number eight, the development is to be completed as per all applicable provincial acts and town bylaws.
thank you, Mr. Guest. Can I have a seconder for that, please? Brenda,
I will second that.
any question on the motion?
Mr. Chairman, Mark here.
Yep,
I would like to add that I respect Mr. Wright's opinion on the water issue, and he doesn't believe that might be an issue, but we heard a complaint from another property owner at the last meeting that he had some concern about the water on his property, and an additional development may impact even furthermore. So I'm recommending that we add to the motion that the comprehensive water assessment is completed to make sure that the development does not increase or impact any other property owners and adjacent property owners. And number two, make sure that all the property owners on this lane or right away also use a proper receptacle for garbage So they don't put garbage bag on the side of the street. They use proper reciprocal garbage that approved by the Fundy Regional Commission.
Yeah, I'm not sure we can do that one, Mark. Tell people to put proper garbage cans on a private lane. I'm not sure, but I'll refer that to Dwight. Hang
My
on.
point is somebody can put a garbage bag out there and the bird picks at it and all the adjacent property owners gotta pick up the garbage.
Okay, I'll refer that to Dwight. Dwight?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Mr. Gosselin, the solid waste bylaw, again, off the top of my head, I think makes reference to using appropriate receptacles to make sure the garbage and things are contained accordingly. So that's governed by an existing bylaw. Again, if PAC wishes to reinforce that, then that's under the discretion of the Planning Advisory Committee if they wish to reinforce it as a term and condition of what's being put forward as a motion. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Guest, were you okay with Mark's 2 comments before we jump ahead? Oops.
Just on the first one with you, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Goslin, just some more clarity on what's required or what you're requesting for you're requesting a stormwater management plan?
That's correct. At the previous meeting, one of the property owner had concern about his property and the water flow going to his property because of the way the land is laid. So my point is to make sure that we don't impact any adjacent property, that water comprehensive assessment is completed, so that if the ditch can support it the way the existing the one that's there today, that's fine. But I would recommend that we have an expert to tell us that over and above, what Mr. Wright is telling us. I appreciate Mr. Wright's comment and I respect his opinion, but I would like to have an opinion from an expert that the development on that property will not impact any adjacent properties with water.
Mr. Guest?
Yeah, just thinking my concern there, and I see the point, Mr. Goslin. My concern is there's been a lot of conversation, and Mr. Wilson referenced this, like nothing's to municipal standard here. It's all been pretty ad hoc. My concern would be, the benchmarks that we'd be putting on by requiring that stormwater assessment wouldn't be fair to Mr. Wright in the context of this application. So I wouldn't be in favor of that, imposing that on this.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Guest. Mr. Preston?
Two comments, I guess. First one is Dwight. Dwight, can we put in our recommendations that the driveway has to abut Misty Lane, so it is adjacent to the road, or does it matter where the driveway is on the property?
Through you, Mr. Chair, again, we always go back to terms and conditions. Planning Advisory Committee has the discretion and authority to impose such terms and conditions as they find fit. And then we always look at sort of the caveat of them being reasonable and enforceable. In that particular case, identifying what would be a reasonable location of a driveway as close as possible to Misty Cove Lane, then that would obviously be, I believe, a reasonable consideration. And if I may, Mr. Chair, just go back to Mr. Goslin's point and the comments from Mr. Guest. Part of any building permit or development permit process would involve a site plan, and that site plan would include a grading plan, and then that grading plan would have to identify where the water is going and any downstream impacts. So it's a requirement that site plans be submitted as part of the development permit and building permit process. And then from a planning perspective, we could look at it from ensuring there's no downstream impacts. That would be a question that would be answered through that process. Again, if PAC wishes to enforce that to a just slightly higher standard in terms of more information to demonstrate there's no downstream impacts as part of the site and grading plan, that again would be reasonable.
Mr. Goslin, did you hear what Dwight was saying, that the site plan does include grading and water drainage on it? That's required from the applicant?
I'm fine with that as long as when there's an application for development or trees are being cut on the properties or work's being done on the property, that a comprehensive water assessment is completed.
Yeah, that's not what Dwight was saying, no, you want the comprehensive study. Dwight was indicating that, when the building plans are submitted, there is a grading plan, a drainage plan that is submitted. It's not a comprehensive plan, because it's a one-lot subdivision.
My concern is we had a local resident, adjacent property owner that had some concern with water. And if, I mean, I respect Mr. Wright's opinion, but how do we know that there'd be no impact, water impact on any adjacent property when the development takes place or whatever? So,
We'll get back to that one. I'll go on back to Mr. Bishop.
I guess I agree with Mr. Galzin that I guess we need to address water. As Mr. Wilson said, he just put an old culvert in there. There is no ditching on this right-of-way. We're not going to call it a public or a private street anymore, on this right-of-way. So that needs to be addressed. There's no way we can put this forward without addressing the water, without addressing the actual road or the right-of-way from the edge of Misty Cove to the edge of Latin 18.1. That should be upgraded to 6 meters of driving surface, like 20 meter wide, 6 meter driving surface, and basically you have to have that portion engineered so that the drainage coming off of this lot is taken care of, because right now it's not, as Mr. Wilson stated. It's just a driveway. If you go and look at it, the culvert is an old damaged galvanized culvert. So how are we going to, he needs to address the water coming across the right-of-way going down to, through Mr. Wilson's property, or the PID 302-99705, which is parcel X that's kind of shown on that plan. I think that has to be in this recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Mr. Preston.
Mr. Chairman, I know how we can address that. It'll be subject, I'm gonna make them, I guess part I want to discuss is any drainage work, any culvert work is subject to the city or town engineering department's approval, and any existing culverts have to be brought to today's standards. Is that enforceable, Dwight, or? Oh, sorry. Basically what I said, Brenda, was any culvert work, any drainage work has to be subject to the town engineering department, and any existing culverts have to be brought up to today's standards.
Misty Cove brought him up to standards, make it a public street?
No, just we're dealing with a culvert that's been there.
Just a culvert.
I'm talking culverts and drainage, subject to the town engineer.
Would that not be covered by that site plan that they have to?
That's what we're going to talk about, Dwight. Dwight, can you answer that question?
Where Misty Cove Lane or Misty Cove ends, that's the end of the private or the public street. There appears to be, based on our information that's being shown on the screen, 2 culverts. There's an actual one that exists in the public street, and then there is a minor one that is existing on Mr. Wright's property. So that, in my opinion, would be a driveway culvert. A driveway culvert cannot sort of back up and all of a sudden cause problems on adjoining properties. So as part of the site plan, we would be saying, okay, where's your driveway located? Are you putting in a driveway culvert? Where's that water flowing? So if it's flowing into the haphazard, if you will, the temporary culvert, then when we say, okay, is that sufficient? Is it going to back up and cause additional problems? So as part of that site plan, drainage plan, we would be requesting a review of driveway culverts to make sure they're adequate.
Thank you, Dwight.
With just one additional point, which goes back to if the PAC wishes to have the town engineering department have a quick review, then that's again the discretion of the planning advisory committee terms and conditions.
Thank you, Dwight. Brenda?
Sorry. Okay, just a couple of points. I have confidence that the staff can handle some of these things. And I do know that even though I have my garbage in a container that's has a cover and wheeled, sometimes they just dump it and it goes all over everywhere. So you can say have different containers, but they don't always work. So anyway, that's just a point, but I do have confidence that staff can deal with the drainage issues.
Thank you, Brenda. Brent?
Mr. Chair, could I ask one question or two? It's Kendall.
Yeah, go ahead, Kendall. Sorry.
My question is, I guess, first of all, on the same lines as Brenda, could staff review the stormwater leaving the development site and see what the impact is on that one particular culvert? And the question that I really have is, could it be kind of worded in such a manner as the pre-development stormwater flow leaving the site, that the post-development has to be less than or equal to the pre-development flow? That way he's not actually making it worse with his development.
I think that's
that-
valid, Kendall, for sure.
Yeah, that I guess I've used that in other cases similar to this, not in Quispam, but in
Yeah.
other locations.
No, I think that's a good valid point. Is that fair, Dwight, to state that?
Through Mr. Chair, it goes back to the Planning Advisory Committee, reasonable terms and conditions. If they wish to request that, they can qualify it by saying that site plans, drainage plans have to be done by a qualified professional. Then when we receive these applications, then that's things that we would follow to request who's actually doing and what are your qualifications. And that would align with the comments from Mr. Mason.
Thank you. How's that, Mark? Mark Guest. Oh, hang on, Mark.
Yeah, no, I'm in favor of Mr. Mason's comments. I agree that what we're trying to accomplish here is leaving it no worse than it started out with, and I think that's a pretty fair balance between the adjacent landowners and Mr. Wright. I think that's a very fair compromise.
Mr. Bishop?
So what about the upgrade of the actual driveway driving surface to the edge of lot 18.1? Should we not put that in there, that it is 20 meters with the 6 meter driving surface, where there is no standard there at all at the moment?
I believe they're asking for a driveway. That's what we're asking for now, so I don't think it has to be, but Mr. Guest is not in favor of that at this point. Mr. Goslin, did that answer your question with that site plan, post and pre-flows, and have the plans signed off by a qualified person?
Yeah, I'm okay with that, yes.
Okay. So with that being said, Mr. Bishop.
Can we just get all the terms and conditions read?
We're gonna, yeah, exactly. I was just about to say that, before we have a motion, we gotta reread the motion.
Challenging the PAC secretary.
Violet, you're on.
Okay, you're challenging me tonight.
No,
So-
we'll help you.
What I'll do is I'll read what I've taken down and what was stricken, if that's okay. Comprehensive stormwater management assessment plan is done and the ditching is properly done to ensure no other properties are affected by this development, and we struck that out.
Correct.
Okay. Drainage concerns must be addressed through a site grading and drainage plan done by a professional that is required as part of the development and building permit. We kept that. However, we didn't state professional of what. So should that be noted that you want professional plumber? Like,
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's Kendall again. Sorry for butting in. I think it has to be a professional engineer.
engineer?
Yeah.
Okay.
And Violet, I would like the pre and post storm.
Okay, I'm going to continue, okay?
Okay, sorry.
The portion of the right-of-way should be brought up to emergency standards of the National Building Code. Is that kept?
That was struck, wasn't it?
There's a difference between
Not
the
a
street
driveway.
right-of-way of 20 meters and then the emergency services go by the National Building Code. So, no, I was just, thought it was stated that it was to the National Building Code, which is what the emergency services use as their standards. Dwight, you want to confirm on that one before we move on?
It's a 6 meter driving surface, basically. 6 meter wide driving surface. But that would be for the point of access, so it's gonna depend on where the location is. As long as there's access from Misty Cove to the driveway, that portion is, again, if PAC is saying that that portion from Misty Cove to where the driveway is located, then has to be 6 meter driving surface, then again, that's the discretion of Planning Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Dwight. Mr. Bishop, you?
Yeah, so would it be to the driveway, to the end of lot 18.18-1? I guess the other part is, I guess there's still no requirement of any turnaround or anything like that, because this is just a right-of-way, but, so the driving surface would go to the edge of the property line of 18.1?
I think that's what Dwight was saying. No, it only would go to the driveway. From Misty Cove to where the driveway goes into the lot. Is that correct?
Access, yeah, it's to access, point of,
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so that was updated to say the portion of the right-of-way from Misty Cove Lane to the proposed driveway should be brought up to the emergency service standards of the National Building Code, that of a 6 meter wide driving service. Any drainage work must be approved by the engineering department of the town, and the existing culverts must be brought up to town standards. The culvert existing at the end of Misty Cove Lane on Mr. Wright's property, considered as a driveway culvert, will be reviewed as part of the site drainage plan and part of the development building permit. The post-development flow must be less than the pre-development flow. All property owners on the right-of-way are requested to use the proper garbage receptacles required by the garbage removal company, currently Faro. And the driveway must abut Misty Cove Lane or as be close as possible to the public street. Did I capture them all?
Sorry, through you, Mr. Chairman, it's the post-development flow must be less than or equal to the pre-development flow.
We got it, Kendall. Thank you.
All right, thanks, sorry.
With that being said, all the other terms and conditions, all the other conditions were applicable. We just read the amendments.
Yeah, I only read from,
Okay, Mr. Bishop?
I guess, what about any future development after this? The road would be upgraded to a public street.
That's item number 1.
It is, okay.
Yeah.
Yep, okay.
So, Mr. Chairman, with regards to the comment of the right-of-way has to be brought up to the National Building Code standards, I'm gonna take the restriction off where the driveway has to be placed.
Take what?
Take the restriction off where the driveway has to be placed.
Okay.
Because now if they put it on the farther edge of the property, they're gonna have to extend that National Building Code standard to wherever the driveway is.
Okay. With that being said, everyone good? Can we have a seconder on that motion? Brenda seconded? Perfect. Any further debate on the motion? None being, can we have a vote, please?
too late. Brent's still not, Evan's phone.
Kendall, you on?
No, Brent, I'm sorry.
Yes, I thought I voted.
Okay, yep,
Yes,
I got
in
his.
favor.
We're
Sorry,
good.
Brent, there, I got him. Okay, got them all.
All right, the motion's been carried by a vote of 5-1. Next 5 to 7 business days, you'll get your letter in the mail with all those terms and conditions, and I hope you understood what we were trying to get across there in that item. Yeah, and I don't think it's too overburden this on you at this point in time. So best of luck, and please work with the town to have all necessary paperwork and documentation in place, and please work with Mr. Wilson to get a compromise in place, so keep trying. Thank you. All right, with that being said, we'll move on to item 8, items for discussion. Item 8A, PAC meeting. Due to PAC members' schedules, a quorum will not be available. PAC should determine if the March 14th meeting can be removed from the calendar and the public notified. We have, during that meeting, myself as chair and the vice chair are away at those 2 dates, so the recommendation is that we cancel the meeting for that date and notify the public and everyone else at this point in time, rather than waiting later to get that off the record. Can I have a motion to support that or disagree with that, please? Brent?
I'll make that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Guest?
I'll second that if I can come with you on your trip.
I'm going to Banff. Can we have a vote on that, please? Motion's carried unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to, is there any items to file on item 8? Yeah, so we need a motion to receive and file the other information items. Brenda?
I would make that motion.
Seconder on that? Mark, Guest?
I'll second that.
All right. So can we vote? Item 9, have motion to adjourn. Mr. Bishop?
So moved.
Seconder on that, please. Seconder on the adjourn? Brenda?
I'll second that.
Thank you, Brenda. Motion carried, meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.